Welcome to the Elvis Presley channel. It's nearly 50 years since Elvis Presley died at the age of 42, an unbelievably popular musician, celebrity and actor. Elvis redefined rock and roll in the late 50s and 60s. He was a larger-than-life celebrity when larger-than-life celebrities didn't exist, and his compound in Memphis, Tennessee, known as Graceland, was a physical representation of his superstardomness. Was Elvis broke when he died? Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you're new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to the channel. His fan base was loyal, and rabid rumours still exist that his death was staged. Though his performances and song tracks set multiple music records and won numerous high-profile music honours, Elvis passed away with surprisingly little money. How did one of the best-selling solo artists in the history of recorded music lose his massive fortune? The reasons are wide-ranging and serve as an interesting cautionary tale for the contemporary up-and-coming stars of today. Although Elvis is one of the most successful recording artists of all time, when he died, he was indeed nearly broke in comparison to the amount that he had earned over the previous 2 decades. When the entertainer died of a heart attack in 1977, his net worth was only $5 million. Considering how much he earned in his lifetime, he should have been worth much, much more than that at the time of his death. While that's not exactly broke, it's a tiny percentage of what the star made throughout his career. Excessive lifestyle spending, bad business deals, drugs and a divorce caused his net worth to plummet, but ironically it was Priscilla, his ex-wife, who turned his fortune around in the years after his untimely death, and now Elvis is one of the highest paid dead celebrities in the world. Did you realise that the king of rock and roll is still making money? Elvis Presley died in 1977, and in the time since his death, his estate has continued to profit from the late star's music sales and visits to his Graceland mansion turned museum, and as it turns out, his estate made more money this year than the singer did the year he died. So where did all Elvis's money go? Elvis shot to fame in 1956 after getting a record deal with RCA Records. His first album debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, marking the first rock and roll album to do so, and stayed there for 10 whole weeks. The rest of his first year as a singer consisted of a ton of successful song releases, countless television appearances, energetic live performances, and his debut film, Love Me Tender. While Elvis was a star, he threw a lot of money at his lavish lifestyle. In 1957, the 22-year-old star bought Graceland, a big house in the suburb of Whitehaven in Memphis, for just $102,000, and then spent another $500,000 on additional 13 acres of land and improvements to it. He moved his family into Graceland, and by the time of his death at age 42, the house had been expanded to 23 rooms, including 8 bathrooms, a den with a soda fountain, and 3 TV sets placed side by side on a wall, and another den, the Jungle Room, with an indoor fountain, decorated in what has been described as Tahitian provincial. He also paid the bills for himself and his Memphis Mafia's antics, including expensive and dangerous invented games like Whip, which was played with Air Force jumpsuits, and $15,000 worth of firecrackers. Elvis would also rent out whole amusement parks like Libertyland just to ride his favourite roller coaster without crowds of people around. He also got hotels to redecorate his rooms to look like his Graceland one so he wouldn't get homesick. At the peak of Elvis's success, he would make $1 million per performance. He had 35 #1 singles and 21 #1 albums throughout his career. Although Elvis is still one of the best-selling solo artists of all time, he wasn't making nearly as much money as one would think by the time of his death. Elvis was spending a lot of money, but basically it was spent in 4 areas: real estate, drugs, his entourage, and his divorce. His home, Graceland, a 23-room mansion in Memphis, was a money-sucking home with its extensive running costs, improvements, extensive redecorating, and the purchase of excessive household goods and cars. Lots of cars. By the late 60s, Elvis had developed a major drug habit. In 1977, one of his two primary doctors prescribed 10,000 doses of amphetamines, sedatives and narcotics within a 7-month period. No one knows just how much he was spending on these drugs, but those close to him knew he was drugged to the point of barely functioning a lot of the time. However, despite his personal lifestyle choices, his biggest expenditures were on family members and the group of old friends known as the Memphis Mafia. When Elvis travelled, the Memphis Mafia always travelled with him. They partied wherever they went, drank huge amounts of alcohol, rented women by the hour, and always drove in style. Elvis footed the bill for everything, including his 3 famous pink Cadillacs. After his mother died, Elvis's father remarried, and Elvis and his new stepmother did not get along. Vernon and his new wife and family moved into a large home near Graceland, all paid for by Elvis. His father redecorated and modified the new house with things like a swimming pool in the bedroom. Other family members, like distant cousins, floated in and out of Elvis's house, looking for charity handouts as well. His divorce from Priscilla Presley also cost him a lot of money. Elvis paid $725,000 outright on top of child support, 5% of the earnings from his publishings, and half of the money made from the sale of their Beverly Hills home. Disturbed by public attention and increasingly paranoid about death threats from morality groups, Presley would also spend money on things that made him feel safe, like buying and carrying loaded guns, even on stage. He spent lavishly on things for himself as well, like ornate jewellery, clothes, and an array of exotic pets. Another contributing factor to Elvis's lack of wealth when he died was his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who had made decisions that affected greatly the amounts that Elvis actually received, and it's estimated that Parker himself drained Elvis of an inestimable amount of money, very likely in the amounts of hundreds of millions of dollars over Elvis's career. Back then, the business of managing a superstar was in its infancy, and this was completely uncharted territory for the industry. Stars had never commanded such fees nor made so much money in the past. Parker didn't have an industry standard to guide him like we do now, but Parker was also known as a shrewd promoter, and was later found by a court to have behaved unethically, had extorted Elvis by charging a fee of 50% of his earnings, and had handled various business dealings in a poor manner. As time passed and Elvis became more and more unwell and unable to care for himself, other people began disbursing money on his behalf, or simply taking things from his home when they wanted them. With Elvis's various ailments becoming more and more chronic, no one was scrutinizing the action and activities of the Memphis Mafia, Elvis's father, or anyone with access to Graceland. Elvis barely had a hit in the decade after his mother's death in 1958, which drained his coffers immensely, as there was a lot of money going out and not so much coming in. In 1968 he staged a comeback with a live televised show and a tour, which was incredibly successful, and the awards started rolling in. He began to perform live concerts again, and in 1973 Elvis performed a staggering 168 live concerts. He was making a lot of money, but his contracts were lopsided and not in his favour. However, Elvis's prescription medication consumption was gaining momentum, and he was no longer paying attention to contracts and payments. In the early 70s he was grossly overweight, and with his mind dulled by the daily supply of pharmaceutical drugs that he ingested, he was barely able to get himself through his concerts. He cancelled a few shows, was unable to perform when he got on stage on occasion, and it was obvious that there was something terribly wrong with his body. Although surrounded by his family and friends, the Memphis Mafia seemed to be content to keep the status quo, and continued to party and spend his money as if nothing untoward was happening. For them, the bank of Elvis was always open. Elvis and his ex, Priscilla, had been divorced for 4 years when Elvis died at the age of 42. Elvis left what he had to his father, his grandmother, and his daughter Lisa Marie, who was only 9 years old at the time. Elvis's father died just 2 years after Elvis, and his grandmother another year later, leaving Lisa Marie the sole inheritor of the estate. Because of her young age, her mother, Priscilla, became the guardian of the remaining estate. Elvis's fortune had dwindled down to $1 million just after his death, after taxes on Graceland and its upkeep were accounted for. Joseph A. Hanks, the Presley family accountant since 1969, pointed out to the grieving family that their income was dropping while expenses were rising, and at some point those lines would cross. And then in 1981, the federal government, taking into account the money made since Elvis's death, reappraised the estate at $22.5 million, up from $4.9 million, and slapped a $10 million inheritance tax on the estate. It was at this point that the lack of royalties coming in highlighted just how much money not only Elvis and his entourage had been spending, but how much money Parker had been siphoning off the side as well. Back in March 1973, an agreement with RCA Records, which then controlled the rights to all of Elvis's recordings, was made. For $5.4 million, Elvis ended up waiving his rights to future royalties on the estimated 700 recordings he had made up to that time. On top of that, Elvis's contract with Parker, which gave his manager a whopping 50% of the star's concert and record income, meant that Elvis only received $2.7 million of the RCA payment. After taxes, that left him with $1.3 million for selling the rights to what is probably the most valuable body of work ever recorded. To give you some perspective of what sort of money Elvis signed away, Elvis had 66 top 20 hits before March 1973. After that date, he had 2 songs that he was receiving royalties on. RCA was collecting the rest. With Graceland costing so much money to run, and Priscilla wanting to keep the mansion as a place Lisa Marie could move into if she wanted to when she was old enough, one of the few options left for Priscilla to keep Graceland running was to turn her former marital home into a museum and tourist destination. For almost 2 years, Priscilla explored other alternatives, always hoping that merchandising would raise enough money, or maybe the record royalties would rise again, giving her enough money to keep Graceland operating until Lisa Marie became of age to inherit it. Priscilla kept direct control of Graceland and established Elvis Presley Enterprises Incorporated, and finally opened Graceland to the public with an investment loan of just $560,000. The loan was paid back 38 days after Graceland opened. The original 13-acre estate is now a huge complex spread across 120 acres and includes a shopping centre, a 450-room resort-style hotel, plenty of car parking, and a motor museum. More than 500,000 visitors make the pilgrimage to Graceland each year. During Priscilla's years as the chairwoman of Elvis Presley Enterprises, she took his fortune from just $1 million to $100 million in value. Turning Graceland into a museum created a fortune for her daughter's future, and Lisa Marie inherited Elvis Presley Enterprises when she turned 25 in 1993. These 2 women have spent decades ensuring that the legacy of the late music icon continues. According to Forbes, Elvis is one of the highest paid dead celebrities, with the majority of Elvis's net worth coming from his continuing music sales and the profits from the Graceland Museum complex. Elvis's music is still being played and heard across the world. His music forms the soundtrack for a Cirque du Soleil show called Viva Vegas in Las Vegas, a city where he was famously almost booed off the stage early in his career, and new albums of unreleased material, as well as new edits of Elvis's classics, still climb to the top of the charts whenever they are released. Although Elvis may have left the building nearly 50 years ago and died with far less money than you might think, Elvis is making more money now than he ever did during his lifetime. His estate executives are taking care of business far better than his manager ever did. It seems that Elvis has faced great challenges not only during his life but also afterwards. In addition, he has not been spared scandals. Why was Elvis Presley accused of stealing his signature style? watch this video.